What will be the future of Sri Lanka, especially in the face of this massive brain drain that is taking place right here in our nation, right before our very eyes? Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. We are here to discuss especially this matter and many other matters also throughout our discussion here on Face the Nation. Getting to know our guests this evening, we've got with us Dr. Sujatha Gamage, Senior Research Fellow at Learn Asia. Thank you very much, Madam, for joining us on our show. We've also got with us Kimali Fernando, former Chairperson of the SLTDA. Thank you very much for joining us on our show. Also on Face the Nation tonight is Daniel Alphonsus. He's a former advisor to the Ministry of Finance. Thank you very much for taking time off your busy schedule and joining us. Also joining us on our show tonight is Shan Yahampat. He's an advisor to the Ministry of Labour and Foreign Employment. Of course, it's always a pleasure to have someone representing the government here to give us some insights on what really is the plan for the future of Sri Lanka. Last and certainly not least, we have Dilip Mudane, the Senior Vice President of John Keel Leisure. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us on our show. So to get right into it, of course, it's an accepted fact that there is quite a massive brain drain in Sri Lanka. And the reason for this brain drain is quite obvious. The economic crisis in Sri Lanka, the collapse in the governance system in Sri Lanka, and of course, one of the main issues that we here in Sri Lanka have been discussing since we received independence, and that is the plague of corruption. So amidst all of these issues, and especially the brain drain here in Sri Lanka, what really is the future of Sri Lanka? Let's start with Dr. Sujatha Gamage, Senior Research Fellow at Learn Asia. Your time starts now.
Thank you. You know, I have a problem with this term brain drain and the word massive. You know, massive we really don't know, because we know there were so many passports issued in 2022, I think nearly 9 million. But in 2016, I just saw that there were about 6 million passports issued. And 2022, there's this pent-up demand after COVID also. So, and we have foreign employment data, but the rest of it, people are going for studies, other people are going on their own. We don't have the statistics. So we really need more data. And actually, Learn Asia is doing a survey right now. We'll have the data in June, but right now, we really don't know the magnitude as much, that I would say. And brain drain, I think that term, it's been there forever. I remember when I was going for my postgraduate, way back in late 70s, you know, I want to do my PhD here, because thinking was if people go there, they stay back, they don't come back. We are full of, you know, nationalist fervor, and I want to do research on appetite, right? That appetite deposit is still there. My supervisor said, please go away, learn something and come back. So we need to think of brain drain as also, you know, they come back, brain drain. And also we have about 15, our young youth, if you take the 15 to 24-year-olds, there's a high unemployment rate. So all this time, you know, maybe they didn't have enough means, for whatever reason, you know, they were there, not in employment or training. So these people, this was the impetus, and I think that most of them are going abroad for studies. So I don't think it's as a really, you know, I think I see the positive side of it. When senior people leave, so for example, the beauty care industry I've seen, the junior people are taking over. They are getting chances to, you know, get ahead in their business. Another thing I notice is that my own example, I've been looking for somebody to help me with my volunteer work, an entry-level person, and I've been having a hard time. Then I thought of somebody who worked for me, got married, had children. I thought maybe she wants to work. See, we have about 30% of our women are not there. Only 30% are in the labor force. The rest are not. So this is a chance for them to get back. So I think brain drain, I would say labor mobility. Right? There's higher labor mobility. And we should think of labor mobility in. I mean, can Indians may want to come and work here, you know, in different industries. We need to make it more easier for people to go in and out. I think we should be talking about labor mobility rather than brain drain. Because brain drain, we get brain gain also. These people come back, more experienced, more educated. So I think both terms, brain drain and massive, both those I would say, no, let's think a little more on that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sujatha Gamage, bringing a new perspective to the discussion from the very beginning. Quite interesting. We'll delve more deep into it during the next round of the program. Up next is Kimali Fernando, former chairperson of the SLTDA.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. A brain drain has been a phenomenon right throughout for decades and decades. About 3.6% of the global population go to another country at some point. Sri Lanka has had a brain drain in the 50s. When the burger community, for example, they migrated, the 50s, 60s. They, in fact, some of them went to Kenya, and they helped to build up the tea industry in Kenya, and who compete with us now. So those are the risks involved. And during 1980s, 83, 84, that time, the Tamil community went, as we know. That was a great loss to the country. And now we are finding a different thing where every single race, all groups of different types of people are leaving. We've had before, as we know, people who went to work as housemaids or to work in homes in the Middle East and so on. Numerous governments encouraged them to go. We as Sri Lankans benefited from their the income, the remittance they sent. We did not give them the respect, I think, that they deserved. We never tried to upskill them. But now we are finding that the professionals are leaving, the doctors are leaving, the IT sector is leaving, the chefs in hotels are leaving. There's clearly an outflow. And I think that the data probably of 311,000 that left last year does not encompass the professionals, because the professionals will not go to a government to report that they are leaving.
So, Kimali, are you disagreeing with Dr. Sujatha?
Yes, I think she's an excellent point, but I just feel that being in the industry, I've been in banking for 33 years of my life and private sector, and then I worked in government for 2.5 years as the chairperson of tourism. So I have a perspective from a private sector perspective, and I see the pain. I literally see the pain.
I think there's outflow, yes, but I'm saying we should work with what we've got.
Yes, and what I feel we should do, use this as an opportunity. Look at the IT sector, for example, in Sri Lanka, right? IT sector, the staff, they lose because they move overseas, one, but they also lose, they leave a company, because what happens, there are tax anomalies, right? So if you work for a foreign company in IT, you don't have to pay tax here. So you'd be in Sri Lanka, you won't work for any Sri Lankan company, but you'll work for a foreign company because you don't have to pay tax. These are policy decisions that the government has to make. Do we help this industry? We need to focus, use this as an opportunity. I think it's hard, but I think it's a great opportunity to change things. Healthcare, for example, look at UK, it's a good case in point. UK used to allow foreign students to work for 20 hours a week. I think you were in UK, Shania. So you were allowed to work 20 hours a week, right, part-time, low-skilled, so that was good for them, the economy, because nobody else wanted to do that job. Now, after Brexit, they've changed the rules, and they said, automatically you get a 2-year work permit to work in UK, automatically. Those days, it was a struggle to get it. And because NHS doctors are now migrating to Australia and New Zealand and wherever they're migrating, they've now opened it up and said anybody who's qualified, whom we recognize, can come and work at NHS. So you have Indian doctors, African doctors, doctors from all over the country. While we have taken a very closed approach, even Sri Lankans coming back, we give them a tough time, get them to do exams and, have this. This is opportunity to relook at all that and say, look, we've done something some way. Now we have a brain drain. We are competing with other countries. We are competing with other countries. Let's be real. We are competing. And it's not only the poorer, underdeveloped countries that lose out. It is UK is losing out. It is Taiwan. Taiwan has 24 million people. We have 22. They have a huge problem. They have the largest brain drain in the world. A lot of people from Taiwan are going to China, going to Singapore, and so on. And that government has done amazing stuff there to bring them back. Malaysia, another one. 5.3% of their population have migrated. 5.3%. Ours is, if our statistics are right, is only 1.4%. So we can talk about this, but there's a lot that I think we should use this opportunity to re-look at specific sectors. If I may suggest IT, healthcare, education. I mean, you got brilliant professors, researchers of Sri Lankan origin overseas. use them online to teach our students. Embrace Sri Lankans, recognize them, make them, we don't make ourselves proud of our country. Singapore did that many years ago when they had a brain drain. And they made a concerted effort to sort of build their nation brand. So things like that which we can work on, and I'm happy to discuss further on the different views, and I think it's a great opportunity.
Thank you very much, Kimali, Fernando. Of course, embracing Sri Lankans and then trying to work with this crisis is one way to move forward, of course. Whether the leaders of our country are ready or equipped to do that is a different question entirely, but we'll delve into more of those. Up next is former advisor to the Ministry of Finance, Daniel Alphonsus. What's your take on this?
So I agree with Sujata that not all migration, not all brain drain is necessarily bad. And with Kimali, that we absolutely need to focus on the migration of professionals. Because if we look at migration, we have brain drain and we have circular migration as well. So circular migration is where people leave Sri Lanka, go and work for a few years, sometimes a couple of decades, but they don't get permanent residency, they don't get citizenship, they don't buy property, they don't establish roots. Their home and their future is still our island. So their capital and their skills come back. It's a circular process. That sort of migration is something that is actually quite helpful.
Even if it's a few decades?
Even if it's a few decades, because the capital comes back, they often come back and retire here, the skills still get transferred. In the case of brain drain, which I think we should be all really prioritize and focus on, is when people migrate for good. They leave Sri Lanka, they go to the UK, the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they get citizenship, their families move there, their extended families move there, their future is no longer on this island. So I think that distinction is a very important distinction to make because we have scarce resources and we need to prioritize. So from a prioritization point of view, that's the type of brain drain that we need to focus on. And that's what I would consider brain drain for the purposes of this conversation. And brain drain is not a new phenomenon. As Kimali mentioned, for political reasons, due to racial policy, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s and 80s, people left the country, and they have left the country more recently as well. Over the cremation issue, some of our most talented entrepreneurs, many of whom belong to the Muslim community, have left. So this is still a live issue, but it has a long history. So there are important political causes for this. There are also economic ones. And again, that's not new either. If you look at the period 1971 to 1974, this is when you had the rice queues and so on. 18% of the professionals in this country migrated in just those 3 years. And we see a repeat of that today with the fuel queues. So we have both political and economic factors that are really driving this problem. And what do we do about it? We can talk about it in more detail, but I think we need to make it easier to stay for professionals. We need to also, unfortunately, make it harder to leave. And we can discuss how we can do that. And we need to improve the supply of talent by bringing in foreign talent and inputting it into our economy.
Thank you very much, Daniel Alphonsus. Well, Daniel, some of the questions or proposals you raised, I think Shan might be able to maybe respond to a few of them. Up next is Shan Yahampath, advisor to the Ministry of Labour and Foreign Employment. What's your take on all of this?
Thank you very much. You can look at this philosophically, you can look at this rationally. So as a policymaker, I would like to be more rational. We have data on migrant workers. Unfortunately, we don't have data on those who have gone abroad, migrated for good. So that is one area that I'm not willing to touch, given the fact that I have no data. Last year, we sent about 310,000 people overseas for work. That's the highest ever recorded in our history. But if you go back 10 years down the line, in 2013, we sent almost 300,000. And on an average, for the last 10 years, we have been sending 200 people. So it is something natural, and I don't think it is something significant. And we don't have data to substantiate it, saying there is a massive brain drain. And at any given time, about 1.3 to 1.7 people live abroad as far as our population is concerned. Either they have gone for work or they live in different countries. If you look at the migrant workers, there are about 280 million people in the world living in other countries. They are the 5th largest population in the world. And they remit about 400 billion US dollars to those countries. And these remittances are 3 times bigger than the aids that they get from development agencies. And highest remittance recorded in our country was a little bit over $7 billion. From 2013 up to 2020, it has been a little bit over $6 billion per annum. Last year, it went significantly down due to various reasons. Now it is picking up again. So I'm not willing to accept the fact that there's a massive brain drain. We can talk about it. Now, if you look at our country from the perspective of an investor, we don't have natural resources. We don't have a large market. So if an investor is coming to invest in our country, what are we offering? We have to offer efficient labor force. Now, when you build an efficient labor force, you have to build industries where these people can be employed. Let's say we educate people, we invest in them, and there should be opportunities for them to capitalize on. When there are no opportunities, of course, these people they go out because they look for opportunities. The number one reason, which are economically driven, is because the lack of opportunities that are in this country. So if you want to retain talented people, we have to build proper industries. I would like to, you to focus on what we call economic complexity. Now, what is the most complex industry we have in this country? Garments. You compare that to certain countries like Germany, where there are 5 different luxury brands of automobile: Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Volkswagen.
Sean, since you're speaking on a very high level, comparing the most complex industry in Sri Lanka to the most complex industries in Germany, let's, for example, speak about at least the ease of doing business index.
Right.
And one factor in that is the legal system here in Sri Lanka. You're talking about bringing investors into the country. You're talking about what are we offering them. We don't have services. We don't have a massive amount of skilled employees. We don't even have a legal system. And
Right.
it doesn't take too long to fix this problem. Why isn't the government doing that? I'm asking you because
Thank you for
you're an
raising
advisor
that.
to the government.
I think we are looking this problem of brain drain in isolation. This is something that we can address in isolation.
Is something we can't address.
We can't.
Okay.
There are other contributory factors that we have to look at.
Okay.
Right? So we have to have a proper understanding as to how we have ended up sending a lot of people abroad. Now, that's not the problem. That is as a result of certain other problems. So rather than, now if you look at the entire social transformation starting from the Stone Age, people mobility has been in the center. That has been significant. People travel. People travel from rural areas to urban areas within the same country. China has that problem. People are leaving certain areas. So we can't stop people leaving, and we should not, as Professor correctly mentioned, we should in fact encourage labor mobility. We have to make it easier. Rather than focusing on brain drain, we have to focus on what we call brain gain. The countries that she mentioned, Malaysia, Taiwan, even India for that matter, that is what they have done. Rather than trying to stop people leaving, you have to understand how we can engage these people. And if you look at the migration, it is circular. People go and come back. They stay here. They go back. And then when certain people go, certain people come back and settle down. So it's a process. So we as a country, we need to understand how we can make use of this opportunity, especially when there are opportunities. And we don't, we talk about people obtaining a passport and physically migrating. We don't talk about people virtually migrating, being here physically, working for other companies in the world. We don't talk about that. Yeah? And then we don't talk about people who are not productive in this country. Simply being here physically, does it mean they're productive? Does it mean they make an active economic contribution? So there are so many factors that we have to discuss. When you talk about brain drain, I think we can talk quite a lot what other countries have done in order to capitalize on these issues that they have, especially if you look at a country like India. They are very specific about their citizenship. They don't offer dual citizenship. They say you either leave it or take it. But they have a unit called overseas Indians. You have an ID of some sort, you can travel without visa. You know, anyone born and brought up elsewhere, if your grandparents, if they were born and brought up in India, if you can trace that, you can still say, you know, my grandparents were here. I need visa. They make it easier for you to come and invest. To maintain an ongoing relationship with that country. Similarly, Taiwan. Taiwan did the same thing. Taiwan, when they first wanted to set up the seed fund, they had no idea what seed fund is all about. Where did they get the expertise from? Taiwanese who went to Silicon Valley. So we can talk about everything, provided we have time.
Definitely. We will provide the platform to discuss these things and more. But however, Shan, just one clarification. Here in Sri Lanka, we don't have that ease, do we?
We don't have what?
We don't have that ease of coming
business.
back.
Well, it's just a bit problematic. We can
Unless,
talk
of
about
course,
that.
you want to enter parliament, then we will change the constitution for you. Moving on, we've got, last and certainly not least, Senior Vice President of John Keel Leisure, Dilip Mudadenia. Your time starts now.
Yeah, I think very interesting points came from all four of them. Have you ever noticed what's happening in a jungle? You really looked at it. During a certain period of the time, the animals, they move from one place to the other. Because the land is not fertile, there's not enough water, there's nothing to eat. That's animal behavior, right? So human behavior is not different to that. So what happens is when things are not good enough, they try to move away for better prospects. So this is exactly what's happening. But when this movement is larger, then we actually tend to say, okay, so it's basically the brain drain, we just coin a word and put it together. Because it's up to 100,000, it's okay. But if it's going beyond 100,000 to 1 million, it's not good, okay. It's basically a problem that becomes. So it's not, if you look at the number of countries, out of the 200 countries that we have, this is somewhat seen even from USA to a country like Afghanistan, who is bottom of the pyramid or the bottom of the list. So those countries continuously face a bigger problem. If you look at Ukraine, in the last 3 months, they have lost 78,000 people just because of the war. And if you look at Puerto Rico, people have moved out. Moved out. So if you look at it from Puerto Rico, another country which is this problem prevails, large numbers have moved out. So Sri Lanka, due to political turmoil that we experience in the country and the problems that they experience, so people said there's no future in this country. They lost hope, and then of course looking for more numbers. As agreed that that has to be established through research in terms of the magnitude of this problem. So this will remain in countries like in Sri Lanka for a longer period, because we don't see solutions coming in early as possible, and these economic situations can improve and will take longer time. But we don't have to worry too much around that. The reason is there could be some solutions as well. So if you sort of crystallize what the problem is, that some sort of people are moving, and that is also linked to a lot of micro factors and the macro factors. So if you look at even the education system in the country, only 1% of the population or 1% of the A-level sitting students can get into the university. And there is no other possibility for them to enter, and if they want to enter, they need to go overseas, and if you go overseas, of course, very few people come back because you've got a lot of other opportunities on those countries. If you look at certain professions like medical professions, we have a handful of people that comes out of it. And then they are being given a lot of free education, etc. There is no restrictions on them. Most of these people go to the university, and then they can actually move out easily, and they are in demand. If you look at most of engineering students in the country, where they add value, and we call STEM students, most of these people who are in that particular field are people in demand. And they basically been in demand with various other organizations in the other countries, and the la creme is being actually picked up by those big brands, because they need people to run it. India does the same thing. Large number of Indians go anyway and work on those countries. So what happens is Sri Lanka is basically then loses the possibility of having creative, intelligent, efficient people to run the systems. And today we see that in most of the places, even in big organizations, we sometimes don't get the caliber of the people that we require in order to do the job. Same with the government as well. Not many people want to join the government because of these days salary issues, etc., etc. Even people who join, who actually work from overseas and come back, there's no conducive environment for them to continue. So we see some of these agencies are really struggling from people perspective. So this is actually a problem that has resulted even not because of this economic turmoil that we have. We also had it in before. but it needs to be addressed in a systematically, especially looking at our education system also, and how do we link that into the requirement. One of the countries that has done this very effectively is Israel. The system, when they were building Israel, nobody wants to come and work there. But they identified Israelis around the world who were doing extremely well. They created a program for them and said, this is your program. This is what your requirement is. This is what we can pay. And they came in and started working in science, in weapons industry, pharmaceutical, agriculture, etc. They were able to build those industries, bring in that knowledge from outside, creating the injection of you being patriotic. Patriotism is driven in that whole. It's a prime example how this country was built with the knowledge of their own nationals who are actually working around the world. So we should have a program. India, we talked about India. India had very recently had a ministry for diaspora. They had the Prime Minister himself, he actually chairs that particular meeting, bring all the Indian diasporas to the best known people around the world, and they actually get the ideas in policy making for the whole country. They get the contribution around it. So we need to create, in order to that, so I mean migration is one element, but there are a lot of people around the world, Sri Lankans who wants to come back, but there's no conducive environment for them to come and contribute. There's nothing available on that. So we need to see that it's a human instinct, that going for better places, that you can't stop. But then it's the responsibility of the people here, the government, etc., creation of required policies to ensure that they can come back, or at least in remotely they can work with us, so that all the industries can actually be built. Then you create an environment where people don't have to go out of the country, they actually remain in this island to develop it.
Thank you very much, Dilip. Quite interesting, you mentioned Ministry for Diaspora and to bring in their talent and all that. Now, I can remember there was a time in Sri Lanka when the word diaspora itself struck fear into the hearts of Sri Lankans because of the antagonistic tone that certain politicians attributed to that word. Do you think it's better now than it was before?
I mean, there are reasons for it. You have the first generation, now the second and the third generation is already there. So it's how you engage. It's part of the population, and if they are willing to. I mean, if you look at it, today Jaffna, it's actually you see the signs of thriving in certain areas, and people come back and invest. Mm-hmm. And we have seen a lot of people who have gone and at that time coming back. So it's part of the country, part of the people that whom we had. So we can't disassociate in that process. So there was a political situation in the country, and that we have gone ahead with now. So it's very important in terms of reconciliation. It's very important that everyone gets involved in the process, so that we build one nation.
Thank you very much.
We need one term, overseas Sri Lankans, let's call them. Not diaspora.
Sri Lankan expats.
Yeah. Overseas Sri Lankan, like overseas Indian.
Yeah.
Overseas Sri Lankan.
I think despite the name attributed to these groups of people, what's important was already discussed and brought out. It's ease to enter Sri Lanka, ease to do business in Sri Lanka, and a sense of patriotism and certain reasons as to why they should invest in Sri Lanka. We will continue our discussion on Face the Nation in the second round, but before that, we'll cross over to a short commercial break. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Face the Nation.
සතුට ගෙන එන ගම්මැද්ද රට නගන ජනපෞර.
In order to extend our services to small and medium entrepreneurs, One Village, One Product program was launched.
I remember one member of parliament who said, vote for us and we will give you the roads. Isn't that amounting to a bribe?
Unlike certain parties who are governing without a mandate, SJB has good ground support, and our people come. Paying them or bribing them or giving them alcohol is not our way of bringing people. I can speak only of the SJB.
The Constitution says
The sovereignty of the states lies with its people. And the people exercise the sovereignty through the institutions of the executive presidency, the legislation and the judiciary. Now, he has not held elections.
Is he likely to, in your opinion?
Well, he certainly won't, because he'll get a good beating at the polls. And even now the SLFP had said, thank God the polls were not held. Sri Lanka had said. So you see, they're all uncertain.
Newsline, Monday to Friday at 8:30 p.m. on TV1.
ළමයින්ටත් අයිතිවාසිකම් තියෙනවා. ළමයි පාරට බහැලා බෝඩ්ඩල්ලන් කෑගහුවේ නැති වුණාට.
ළමයින් අපයෝජනයෙන් වළක්වා ගැනීම, විශේෂයෙන් වළක්වා ගැනීම තුළ රටේ සම්පත් ඉතුරු වෙනවා කියන එකට වඩා වෙන්නේ ළමයේ ඒ නරක අත්දැකීම විඳින එකෙන් වළක්වා ගැනීම.
දියුණු රාජ්‍යවල කරලා තියෙන පිළිවෙත් අපිටත් අපේ රටේ ඇති කරන්න පුළුවන්.
අපිට කලාව නිසා තමයි අනික් කෙනෙක්ගේ දුක අඳුර ගන්න පුළුවන් වෙන්නේ. ඒ කියන්නේ සහකම්පනය කියන හැඟීම දැනෙන්නේ. අනිකා සම්බන්ධ සංවේදීභාවය ඇතිවන්නේ. විටිමිට ඇහෙන ප්‍රවෘත්ති වලින් ඒ වගේම අපි දකින දේවල් වලින් නිරීක්ෂණය වෙන්නේ ළමයි ගොඩක් වෙලාවට මේ තර්කකාරී ලෝකයේත් එක්ක මේ කලාව සමග තියෙන බැඳීම සහ සාහිත්‍යයට යොමු වීම අඩු වෙලා තියෙනවා.
අපිට ඕනේ හොඳ දක්ෂ සේවකයෝ. නැත්තම් වහල්ලු නෙමෙයි. මේ රට ගොඩනගන වෙලා ගොඩනගන්න තියෙන අවශ්‍යතාවය.
අර කියන්නේ අය රට ගොඩනගන්න තියෙන අවසන් අවස්ථාව කියලා.
ඔව්. එතකොට
කියන්නේ.
ඔව්. ජාතික මෙහෙවර සතියේ දිනවල උදෑසන 10:00ට TV1 ඔස්සේ.
Welcome back. You're watching Face the Nation. This is the second round of Face the Nation, where our panelists will be grilled by our journalist here today. We've got with us here today Shanaya Dedigamba. Good evening, Shanaya, and also a guest journalist, or our guest journalist, Shihar Aniz. Let's open the floor for questions now. Why don't we start off with Shanaya?
Thank you, Shalan. I actually have two questions. I'll direct my first one to Daniel and then the second one to Dilip. Daniel, how is this exodus of migrants leaving the country affecting Sri Lanka's appeal to foreign investors, for example?
So, obviously, what foreign investors primarily look at is the ability to produce a good or service at the cheapest price possible. An important part of production is the labor costs involved, and the labor cost is for a given level of productivity. So it doesn't mean necessarily the cheapest labor, but the greatest return per dollar. In that sense, at the moment, with the huge exodus of professionals and skilled persons leaving the country, it's making it more difficult to do business and more costly. And that's a serious challenge for in all sectors, in the services sector and in the manufacturing sector.
Why is it more costly?
It's more costly because the productivity of the labor on average reduces. It reduces directly because there are people who are skilled are leaving, which makes it more difficult to do a given task, but also because skilled managers, people who add value, who extract value out of the labor force as a whole, are leaving as well. People who can put processes in place, people who can connect ideas together, people who can connect people together. All of these highly skilled individuals that are required for the functioning of complex supply chains, both in the goods and in the services sector, are extremely valuable, and who are able to also engage with their principals overseas and provide the specific knowledge that is required in the managerial talent.
Okay. And Dilip, I think you cited a lack or an absence of a conducive environment as a motive for pushing skilled labor out of this country. And I can completely vouch for that because my background is in politics, but I wouldn't even consider joining youth politics, for example, because of the way that it's, portrayed. In looking to rectify this problem, what are the ways forward?
I mean, it's countries are policy driven. It has to be. So you can't be changing policies from every month and then changing the direction. So that's why some countries are doing well, some countries are doing pretty bad. If you look at countries like Korea in the recent last 5-6 years, forget about the Western countries, but Korea was able to come out as and improve that image consistently. And then they are drawing labor from other countries, and then as a country they were able to bring and introduce large number of great brands. Not only from technology perspective, even from culture like K-pops, and which is basically taking the entire world into another direction. So it's a classic example how what image that we had in Korean War 20 years back, and now where Korea is, especially South Korea. So it is important that as a country that we work on policies that are conducive and taking examples from countries who have done this very effectively. So otherwise, whether you're not only the people who will live here, it will also actually will have avoid people coming from other countries. And if you look at some of the best brands around the world, let's say Google to Boeing to even to Bosch to so many other. So if you look at the number of people who are working, and in Google, there are more Indian origin or Asian origin people than Americans working there. So what they were able to bring them in and build a great product. So there's multicultural element is there. So what we need is that we need to make a certain thing conducive for people from overseas to come here, as well as the locals, so that we could actually build those brands, and then the brands actually can help the entire nation to bring up. And once that happens, then actually spillover effect will go to all the rest of the people in the country.
Let me ask you, Sean. Now, there is a government policy that Ratayamu. I mean, you try to kind of send people out because we need more remittances, right? And it's basically kind of you all are doing through government to government negotiations. But what is the plan in the future, right? Now, if you send, for instance, like health sector workers, right? Sri Lanka still has a free education, free health sector. If you are going to send all these, professionals from both sectors, Sri Lanka is going to end up with poor health and poor education, right? With poor education and poor health. So what's the plan for the future?
So let me answer the last part of your question about doctors and teachers and nurses in education and healthcare. At any given time, 10% of these professionals are on sabbatical leave. They get to go work elsewhere. It could be for professional reasons or personal reasons. So it's happening. It is just that it has been highlighted significantly given the fact that there's a huge demand. Not that government is trying to send people away to get remittance into the country. It is just that government is facilitating safe foreign employment. Again, given the fact that there is a huge demand. Simply because one has a passport doesn't mean you can go abroad. In fact, certain categories of youth in this country think that when they have a passport, they can go abroad. They don't understand the fact that they have to have certain vocational skills. So, since we don't have data, we are carrying out 3 island-wide studies. Number 1, we are working with ILO, International Labour Organization, to carry out an international foreign employment market overview to understand where there are opportunities in what sectors. As an example, if you look at the Gulf region, especially countries like Saudi Arabia, they are investing $7 trillion in a massive development project. It's known as NEON project. They have one called Line project and one project called Oxygen, where there are huge demand for certain professionals. There are quantity surveys who have gone from our country. They get paid easily about $15,000 per month. Look at how much money they can earn here. So we are doing that study so that we can move away with the negative brand that we have as a country that sends women to work. In fact, if you look at 310,000 that we sent last year, only about 24% have gone abroad as domestic workers. Similarly, we are doing a study here in collaboration with the Chartered Institute of Personnel Management to understand the labor demand for the next 10 years. Now, we don't have future policy directions yet as to what industries we are going to focus on, what strategies that we are going to put in place. We know that there's a document is in the making called Vision 2048. We don't know what it is going to entail yet, but if business, if you look at the ongoing businesses that are there, industries, what kind of demand that these industries are going to generate. So we need to understand that. So we have collaborated with CIPM to do that study. And then also, since we don't have data, we are in the process of developing what we call a national labor market information system. From birth to death of an individual, we need to trace what they do, where they work, in what industries, what education qualifications they have. Now, even when you talk about unemployment, some people don't want to work willingly. Not that they don't have jobs. Some people are not employable, some people are employable, but they don't want to work. But we as a government, we need to know exactly where our people are and what they do. And with that, we can see, now if you look at a country like Singapore, they have a national competency framework. They understand the industries they have. They look at the emerging industries in the world. They look at the investments that they're going to attract into the country. Based on that, once in 10 years, they relook at the content of the education. Now, for us to make that kind of policy decisions, we don't have proper data. So rather than blaming and complaining, we have initiated putting up a national labor market information system that would be up and running ideally, mid-2024, but it should collect big data for us to make policy decisions. At least we have to start. So these are the three things that we are doing so that we can make informed decisions about when we make policy decisions. But given the fact that there are certain difficulties in the country, now why people leave? Because we have no wealth in our economy. Now, as you mentioned, our people go to Korea, and those jobs are called 3D, dirty, demanding, and dangerous. These are not nice, posh jobs. These are physically demanding.
I remember there was a manager of a bank who went to Korea for fishing and also unfortunately passed away a few months ago.
So they easily make about 1 million Sri Lankan rupees. They come back, they put up houses, they educate their children. Now, if they were to be here, they can't make that kind of money. So we as a government, we have to create jobs on one side. And for us to create jobs, we have to make it easier businesses and entrepreneurs to operate on the other side. If you can't promote entrepreneurs, if you can't promote businesses, they can't generate jobs. When we generate jobs, when we encourage entrepreneurs, then only our economy can make wealth. When there's wealth in the economy, then we can retain people.
Shan, we've had many people come on this show and say, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do this. But you are an advisor to the Ministry of Labour and Foreign Employment. You'll have a little bit more knowledge on the inner workings of the plans. Yeah. So what really is the government doing to, encourage employment, bring in more wealth to the country?
When I say government, it's about the labour and foreign employment, unfortunately. Okay. That is where I work. So, these three projects that I mentioned are underway at the moment.
So this is to collect data to create policies.
That's
right.
Scary to me. The whole population?
Because,
we have surveys, no? We have sample surveys. Isn't that more? We have National Labour Market Observatory. We have the quarterly labour reports.
So, ma'am, we have formal and informal sectors. We have micro, small.
If you talk to the companies and hotels, they could easily tell you how many people have gone overseas and to which country. And they could even tell you the salary they are getting.
So we all know what needs to be done.
Other two?
I think we need more data. We don't need more thinking. It's really a question of political will.
Yeah, Didil, I agree with you that we don't have data. But if you really, talk to people, the feeling of brain drain is significant now than anywhere in the past, right? Absolutely. So if you talk to the banking sector, they will say every week 5 or 4, 6 people are leaving the country. They are resigning.
Yeah. But
Same
these are
thing with
unprecedented times.
Yes,
these are unprecedented times.
That's right, and the health sector also the same, right? So now we are talking about all these. You came up with a very good story, very good example, like the jungle story, right? Animals are leaving because they don't have the resources or maybe water, but at least they return. But here we don't see that, right? So there is something wrong policy-wise, right? And we talk about corruption, we talk about rule of law. Now there was an incident about this Oman investor, right, who has been attacked by some political thugs, right? And now he has been given protection by the government, right? Can all the investors get that, right? So here there is some issues, right? So policy-wise, what are the things we have to do? You all can answer.
Can I
Yes,
quickly add?
Yeah.
Now, he has been talking about policy consistency.
Yeah.
Why we don't have consistent policies? Because we don't have right information, right data. We do understand we have certain data. What we are trying to do is to look at this systematically. Now, we have a problem right now we can answer, but that answer won't be long term. You know, our problem today is as a result of what you have done in the past. So it is lack of systems thinking, you know, your inability to look into the future and understand what's going to happen. So it is not just mere collecting data. You know, we need to understand exactly where our people are. Like you were born and you were educated where? You know, have you obtained higher education? Have you got any vocational training? We don't have that kind of data, you know, in terms of provisions. We do have in certain areas, but, you know, these data systems that are there in the government sector, they don't talk to each other. They're in isolation, and there are certain disagreements about certain basis of collecting data. Sometimes they don't tally.
So, true, Sean, this has been the case for the last, I think, more than 75 years. I mean,
yeah.
Right?
So
we are
without
talking about policy consistency, but it has never come. Yeah.
If we look at the framework of what needs to be done, we need to make it easier for people to stay, harder to leave, and replace talent. On all these 3 points, we don't need that much data. On easier to stay, we know the reasons why people have left are political and economic. If we make a country where people feel safe, where people feel equal, where people feel that this is their home and they're not treated as second-class citizens, that itself will solve some part of the problem. You won't have migration like took place of the Burghers, the Tamils, and now increasingly the Muslims. On the economic side, the cost of living is unaffordable. And a significant part of that is tariffs. The cost of a chicken in Sri Lanka is more expensive than in Singapore, and that's largely driven by tariffs. The same is with cement. The same is with steel bars. Across the economy, government policy has made it unaffordable to live in this country.
And then this is because they have to pay for the past sins of...
And for the enrichment of a few individuals who shape tariff policy for their own private benefit.
Private businessmen.
That's right. So that's on the easier to stay. On the harder to leave, again, there are provisions that exist. The Compulsory Services Act can enforce that somebody who has gone to a government university has been paid, the education has been paid for by the taxpayer, is required to perform a period of service in this country. Of course, there's the option where they can pay up their bond and leave. These are not enforced properly. They're not
actually enforced at all.
Exactly. Yeah. There are mechanisms that can be put in place to ensure that. Previous governments in the 60s and 70s did this. What do we do instead? We prevent people who are living miserable existences here just below the poverty line, who are trying to go to Australia. We're stopping them rather than putting in place measures to get the taxpayer to get the return that they've invested in these universities. And then I think also in terms of making it harder to leave, working with other developing countries that face the same issue. Points-based migration is, as I think Dilip put it, skimming the cream of the cream. Yeah. It is essentially theft from our taxpayers. All the developing countries in the world need to get together and shame the developed world for doing this. I have much less objection to a green card type random lottery. But points-based immigration, I would rather not have a cent in aid from any developed country, but just get rid of points-based immigration.
I have a little bit of a different view. I think that, yes, when you pay for a doctor or an engineer, you pay for his education. And more so, what happens is that they were supposed to be part of the growth plan, so they've left. They were part of the taxpayers, and we don't have that anymore. They were part of the consumer and the economy of, all that. So we've missed out. I'm not 100% keen on trying to force them to stay back. That a little bit of that can be done, but I think two ideas. One is try to get the doctors, Sri Lankan doctors, to come back, make it enabling. That's easy. Sri Lankan doctors don't give all these exams and all these, whatever they're doing. Sri Lankan doctors, let them come back and practice here, make that enabling. Allow their spouses who are foreign nationals or whatever, automatic resident visa, children, automatic resident, simple things which cause anxiety to them. Now Taiwan did that up to an extent because Taiwan said come back. And even if you're a government servant and studied somewhere else, you still can go to a private company, they said, but come back. And they had a database, and they worked so closely with their expats, Taiwanese expats, and got them back from Silicon Valley. They got them back from China and Singapore. So, I mean, I think we have to have first the understanding that there is a problem, I think, and then to understand why there is a problem. Corruption, lawlessness. You have to understand, educated, skilled people is really important education for their children. And the substandard education here and how much they have to go after people to get their children into school and all that. You see that the same thing in India. When the Indians went to America, they went to particular states and particular areas in a state because they were the best schools. They had best schools for their children. So you have to understand the mind of a professional. He or she wants to build a future for himself and his family. He wants his kids educated really well. He wants excellent health care, which you don't have here, right? You don't have good education here. You don't have health care here. You don't have, they want law and order and to be treated fairly. That's not done. They look at the corruption. That's not done. They see an elite political class, and they don't feel, as professionals, being treated fairly. They see different laws to different people. So they don't feel a part of it. They are not proud of the country. And that's what we have to learn from all the other countries. They've done certain things to make their citizens proud of Singapore, proud of Taiwan. And that's one of the things that I always try to do as a chairperson of tourism, is to try to make people have pride in our culture, our heritage, and in everything about us. And then not to, like, in single, if you say, they are doing that all the time, our Sri Lankans. I think we should be proud of what we have achieved. But know as a government, there are fundamental problems. And that when we pay taxes, we don't know what it's used for. And unsolicited tenders, even I saw one 2 weeks ago. A cabinet paper for unsolicited tender in tourism. So it's still happening. So that's what affects professionals like myself as well, right? I don't want to go and I will be remaining. But many of the people I know want to go because they don't feel treated fairly. They don't have a fair chance. They don't have a future. And education is a huge area you need to use. Get professors from overseas who are Sri Lankans, who've got awards and research and whatever. Work with all the other professors in Sri Lanka and up the game on education. Teach English, online, all that. And having committees and whatever. You don't need a lot of committees. You can look at all the other countries. What are their O-levels? What are their A-levels? What is this? Literally talk to those governments and get them to come to our country and help us. Look at Japan, the ethics of what their children are taught. Ask the Japanese. Ask the Singaporeans. Ask the Germans. They have an amazing, I worked in Germany. So I can tell you they have an amazing vocational training thing. By the time our people do committees and research and studies, they probably lost the next election. So it's not only this government, every government I'm saying. I don't mean any political party because I'm not interested in political parties, but everyone does that. So I think that we need to urgently look at this. But I really do feel that this is a really great opportunity also to change the rules, change the labour laws. Now our Sri Lankans want these labour laws where you can never sack them and you have to go to whatever. But they happily will go to Australia or America or UK and get sacked in 3 weeks.
Hire and fire policies.
Yeah. So things like that, the labour laws need to be changed. So you almost need to do a mind map. If you're in government, you need to do like a mind map of all the issues and draw and what needs to be done, and it needs to be like done super fast.
Maybe Dr.
No, I think this focus on professions a little too much. And they're some of the most, including myself, fickle people. To bring them back, they need a lot. The macroeconomics, microeconomics have to be right. I think we should look at the next layer. See, I would go further than what Daniel said. He said, we should get the money, we invest in the profession. I think we should not be investing in them at all. Now look at, if we take a cohort of youth turning 18 every year, it's about 350,000. Only 8% would go to a public university, right? We had to look at the cohorts. So what we're doing in the whole education system is really focusing on those. Or the national exams are really, just obstacles to get them there. The rest, what about the 92%? The education system, it serves them. So that 8%, actually, we are spending 500,000 per student at the university level, and in the schools we spend 35,000 per student. I mean, university education costs more, but take South Korea. I compared South Korea very recently. South Korea, actually, the per student spending for school education is actually more than per student spending for higher education. They get more private contributions. The priority is this 92%, you know.
Yes.
So I think right now, I think the time is right, because I've been telling in a parliamentary select committee also, I asked them, what about the 92%? Have you heard from them? They're off the radar, right? So we need to focus on them, put double, triple the money for school education, and really get if you go for higher education, get a loan and pay it back.
So we
really...
That's absolutely right,
yeah,
because...
we should not be investing at all. Then, you know, they pay it back and go. It's a loan. But for school education, you know, we have to, if it's 35,000 per student, we need to increase it to 100,000 per student, and more for, you know, disadvantaged areas. So we really need a brain resetting. We are focusing too much on professionals, you know. We can't depend on them. Somebody said there are two types of immigrants, you know, those who come back and those who settle there, the professionals, you know. It's so hard to get them back. A few would come back, you know, some people, like Sanjeev Veerwan is somebody who came back and started up research. Very few, you know. But most professionals, you can't count on them.
But I think that when you look at the professionals, if I may say, you need to look at the professionals, they made a decision to go overseas, okay? We as a country often say we'll give tax advantages, whatever, to companies. What you really need to do is look at individuals who left the country. Focus, because these are individual decisions that families took. So rather than giving a company a tax-free, you need to look at, if it's IT that you want to focus on as a government, say for example, you want to focus on IT. Look at the IT professionals who went overseas and look at them individually and say, if you're going to come back, these are the benefits you're going to get, or these are the advantages, whatever
But then,
you want to go.
Himali, that's gonna, you know, upset open a whole can of worms. Because then, I think you know where I'm going with this, and who would end up getting these tax benefits in the form of being...
Not tax benefits, but give them some kind of a support for them, rather than only the companies. Because now we're just focusing companies and giving companies don't have staff.
But you gave the answer earlier. You said have high level industries, then they'll come back. That will pay more.
Yeah. So, in terms of tourism, you need to build the brand, the profile of Sri Lanka, so that you can get a better yield. Of instead of your $40, $60, try to get $250.
Then we pay our
then you pay
more.
a chef better, so that
then they can stay back.
If you get 2/3 of research has shown, like if you get 2/3 of what you're supposed to get overseas, you'll stay back, because you don't have to give him 100%. Because 2/3, because the whole inconvenience of moving, right? So if you give him 2/3 of what he could get, I think, you know, so. Tourism is another discussion altogether, because I think tourism you need to reprofile where we really deserve, rather than just pushing numbers and saying mechara suddu awa, mechara suddu awa. Rather than saying that, look at the yields and look at the experience. How much, what is experience from the time you apply for the visa? What's the experience of the website? What's is the airport Instagram worthy? It doesn't have to be posh, but is it Instagram worthy? Is it having the coconut trees and the water and the fish and the whatever and the tea and the cinnamon and whatever, the airport with masks and whatever, so it's Instagram worthy. What is the experience when you come out of the airport? What you have? What is the experience you have on the train? Does the government provide the public toilets? All that, and the law and order and all that. If you start doing all that, you can gradually start profiling, of course with PR agencies, international PR agencies, assistance. Now Maldives has, I think about, last I heard was like 16 PR agencies, Maldives has. And a lot of people say, why are we not like Maldives? Because we don't do anything like Maldives. That's why. We just go B2B and we go to trade shows and we come back and we say, we'll do another road show in India or whatever. And then they say, we
pack up a bunch of officials, take them on a trip.
But
Dilip,
I would like
yes, you've been very patiently listening and observing. Seems like you've got a lot to say.
No, so basically, there's a famous Sinhala. I would like to connect the education and then how do we address this issue. Statement said that Aluteng Yamak Nohadana Jatiya Nagi no city. A nation which doesn't develop new things doesn't prosper. So if you look at India, if you look at the number of brands that they have come out with, if you look at Airtel to Tata to LIC to HCL to Hero Honda to even events like Indian Premier League, etc. It's massive. So what happens if you look at the education system in the country, if you look at the STEM component called science, technology, engineering and mathematics, that's basically below a certain accepted level. I saw some statistics over 70% of the O-level students fail their mathematics in the country. And we have a large number which is on the creative science, which is also important to a certain extent. So if you don't have enough STEM graduates that are produced, then the ability for your innovation component will be affected. And that's why Sri Lanka has not produced a single global brand, whereas India has produced large number. The countries that produce large number of global brands have the ability to prosper because they bring large amount of foreign exchange earnings.
But Dilip, can you really say that Sri Lanka hasn't produced any global brands?
If you look at first 200 brands, none of the Sri Lankan brands. Yeah. Or if you look at first 1,000 brands in the world, none of the Sri Lankan brands there. From valuation, revenue, perspective. So we are not even there in the first 5,000. So if you can...
Where about are we though, Dilip?
So we haven't produced in the sense we have some...
5,000?
First 5,000 we don't have it. It's not a single brand. So from a volume revenue perspective. So if you look at top brands like Google, Marlboro and all of them, so they are actually able to, Boeing, they're able to build Tesla, they're able to bring anything, and then the revenue is such that, they have created multiple opportunities. So it is important that, we look at the education and we create such graduates sufficiently so that they actually can come back and create more elements in the country so that people have more opportunities to build large businesses in the country through the innovation. We see a couple of innovations coming in like Vega and things like that, but we need more of those to be produced from here. We are actually even export, as all that is concerned, we are not even value addition is not very significant. We're almost white labeling most of the products that we have. So that component is something to look at it as a solution so that we actually produced sufficient graduates who can actually think on innovation. And innovation can actually help to build brands. Once you build brands, the countries can prosper, and that can create economy where actually the people in the country don't have to go and seek large jobs outside, like what India has done very successfully, what Korea has done successfully. The best electric vehicle is now coming from Vietnam. So those Asian, I'm not talking about even European countries. So there are enough examples to do it. So we need to create the education system to create such graduates so that we get a more output from these people, not just only the free education.
So Dilip, in this instance, there is, what you're kind of saying is there's no need to reinvent the wheel per se. You don't need years and years and years of research to take the first step, at least. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so obviously, so what I'm saying is if you look at it from an education perspective as one of the solutions, there are long-term and short-term solutions, we need to focus more on the STEM area and creates a lot of graduates who actually can come and contribute to the economy. We don't have enough.
Dilip. We have technology stream. No, we don't. I think we
how many engineering faculties we have?
But these graduates are from the school system and they've learned to rote learn, and these graduates are not creative because the raw material is all wrong. And I always said we should not be producing
graduates. Do you mean the education system?
Yes, the school education system.
Yeah.
That is the problem.
Yeah.
The feedlot into our universities is really rote learned. They're brainwashed, and the universities brainwash them further. We have our science graduates; they don't have jobs. I mean, science graduates, we really don't have enough jobs as science graduates. You don't need to be a science graduate to be innovative. Our school level science education, if you get a good science education, the creativity, if you don't kill the creativity, that's where you get the innovation. They'll hire PhDs, but the innovators don't need to be graduates. We know that the innovators are people who left
area. Entrepreneurship is very important.
As I was saying, that we should not be spending too much money, more money on graduates. We should be spending money on school education. And if we can produce some really good critical thinking, creative people after 13 years of education, the rest will take care of itself. I think we have really shortchanged our school education.
We have been talking this brain drain, time to time, but we also had brain gain, like, our people coming from other countries to Sri Lanka soon after the war ended, plus soon after the 2019 election. We saw some sort of a inflow, right? Because of the hopes. So to create that kind of hopes, what are the policies we need immediately? I mean, from, coming back from a bankrupt country. Other than that, what are the policies we have to kind of show to the rest of the world? Here we are ready to accept you.
I think get the IMF deal done, get the macroeconomics right first. I mean, that's a
So I
priority.
think you need to make it easy for foreign talent to come into the country. There's two very simple measures that can be done to make that possible. That is, anyone who is a permanent resident or a citizen of a developed country gets on arrival a 3-year visa where they can work or live in Sri Lanka. The second one is unilateral recognition of qualifications of anyone who lives in a developed country. If you can build a bridge in England or Australia, or you can treat a human in England or Australia, you can treat them in Sri Lanka.
Daniel,
mobility.
Daniel, you said we need to make it easier for people to come to Sri Lanka, easier for people to work in Sri Lanka. My question to you is, how hard is it to make it easier for people to come to Sri Lanka, to work in Sri Lanka?
This is a cabinet paper. What I'm just describing here. It doesn't even require legislative change.
No, when I say how hard is it, I don't mean, how much
but
effort
the medical,
goes into...
the professions are closed shops. You have to work with each of the professions, like medical practice. You have to go through the SLMC.
Oh, so you can change all that.
But
The
it's
government-
SLMC, but actually that whole thing, I did a little bit of a study on this. SLMC regulations today says that you do a MBBS in Sri Lanka, but you must do the MRCP or FRCP in UK, Australia or New Zealand. That's the rule today. So the postgraduate education is done overseas by all doctors here.
Yes.
Because they don't have the capacity or capability to do it, or whatever the reason, I really don't know. Today, a doctor in Sri Lanka does MBBS in Sri Lanka, then he or she would go to an UK, Australia, New Zealand and do a MRCP or FRCP, whatever they are specializing in. So specialization is done all overseas.
But we're
however, a Sri Lankan person who goes to UK or Australia or New Zealand
And
does
does
the
the
MBBS
qualifications.
there, comes back here, they give them an exam.
Yes.
So that's our mindset change. You can't blame governments or politicians for that. That is a mindset we have in Sri Lanka, where they are scared of their own brothers and sisters. I mean, these are Sri Lankans coming back to Sri Lanka because they somehow see them as competition, I don't know, in some form. So they get them to do 2 exams, like
They
2
are, aren't
sections
they?
of an
They are competition.
no, not competition, but they are on the other hand saying, we are going to go, we are all going, and now there's nobody in Anuradhapura and there's nobody somewhere else, they keep saying. So don't charge us tax on one side. And on the other side, they're saying, don't allow our own Sri Lankans to come in. Now look at India. India allows any of the Indian nationals to come back to India and practice as a doctor. No exams, nothing, you walk in and start working. Do you know that Sri Lankan doctors can go to Singapore and work, can go to Australia and work, can go to UK and work, no exams. UK allows anyone to come from Africa to whatever. But Sri Lanka only, we have 2 parts of an exam and then you have to be sent again as like a rotation out of. So these are policy. Example for you for what policy you asked me, that's one policy. Second policy for IT, I would say, I agree with him up to an extent that allow outside non-Sri Lankans to come, but I would put a caveat for that, is that subject to them they're coming at market rates. So you can't, if something is worth 100,000 rupees here, and you get 100,000 rupees, we can't bring someone for 80,000 and push you out and give someone...
Which is my proposal is for people from developed countries. So we can define developed as per capita GDP 4x of Sri Lanka or 5x.
Yeah, but you can't reduce our Sri Lankans.
So no one will come if they're already from.
But I don't know whether we can be racial in that sense of developed countries and what
We have to be practical.
How do you word the policy?
Very simple. A formula: per capita GDP 4x of Sri Lanka.
No, I would say it's simple as this: you are a company, you advertise 3 times, you can't find somebody, you can put it in the international this thing, and you can recruit. By the way, that's what UK used to do those days, where they couldn't recruit people from outside. They had to advertise and they had to justify it in some way. Now, tourism, we allow that. When I was the chairperson, we used to allow that, but it was a bit of a process. I think that process should be removed. So if Shangri-La wanted a Chinese chef, they would have to write to the chairperson of Sri Lanka Tourism and explain why they needed. I mean, these are things that, Shangri-La Hotel needs a Chinese chef to do the Chinese food. Why do we need to, as government, to approve that? So I think to answer your question, that's the policy I would put for tourism, for example. Allow the industry to get people for a temporary measure during this period. Maybe take a period of 5 years, say, that for the next 5 years, you can recruit people if you can't. And if they have to pay, like he said, get them from developed countries, they'll have to pay higher. So if they're willing to pay that, that means they'll be charging the consumer more, right? Which is good for the country because you get more foreign exchange, right? So I think that's a second policy. Third policy I would say is completely revamp education and literally go to another country and ask them, can we have your syllabuses and whatever, and implement it like very soon, right? Without doing any more committees and all, like implement. And education, I totally agree with the professor, because we've let our people down. We've literally let our students down. So like that, you could go industry, and I cannot forget agriculture. Give preference for agriculture, reprofile, rebrand. Talk to Dilip, he's doing some agriculture now. So now he's doing it as a senior.
Is it organic?
I don't know whether it's organic, but reprofile it. I think Israel has done an amazing job making agriculture really cool to do. And I think we got to reprofile it.
Mongovia.
Sorry?
Mongovia. Well, we did have a swing at that, but apparently we fell on the wrong side of the moon on that.
So let me come back, since we worked on this small statistics, we are talking about the STEM, why India produces over 32% of the global STEM graduates. India.
Global STEM graduates,
global STEM graduates, India produced 32%.
Do you mean like domestically in India, or people of Indian origin?
Total STEM graduates in the world, India produces 32% of them.
Wow. So out of the whole population, 32% is from India.
From STEM graduates.
Do you mean they graduate in India, or people of Indian origin?
No. The total STEM graduates as a pool.
Okay.
India produced 32% of them.
For export.
Export or local consumption. The second thing is that in terms of the global innovation index, India is within the first 5. Okay. The third one is the number of brands that India has come out with in the recent past. Is you see they are actually taking the world as well. So there's a correlation between the STEM graduates, innovation index, how innovative a country can become, and building global brands. So that's the link. So whether it can be done through the primary education or secondary or combination of that is a separate question. So what I'm saying is, in the absence of that in Sri Lanka, not producing sufficiently, we do not see such links that we have seen in Korea, Vietnam, and India. And if you have that, the countries can produce and countries can create those big brands, and it's time for us to do it. Without that, I mean, if you look at the size of Google, it's actually their revenue is actually bigger than entire GDP of Sri Lanka.
Actually, I think going for brands, whether it's a wrong approach for us, because we are a small country. Now the thing is, we need to just connect to global value chains. We might be producing some small part in a cell phone. I think that's probably, whether we'll ever need to go for big brands, I'm wondering. Because
size of the countries and creation brand, there's no correlation. IKEA, we have multiple brands. Belgium, small country.
Taiwan is,
you look at Belgium, small country. You have Belgium chocolates. Singapore, how many brands have Germany?
So for Sri Lanka, I think
Israel. You take Israel, size of the country.
But I think we have so many industries which produce small parts, part of global value chains. Maybe that's what we should be looking at.
No, but I think Dr. Sujatha, what Dilip is trying to say is, it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive.
Exactly.
We can do both at the same time.
Yeah. But it's useful to have a brand because that builds your nation brand.
That gives your country more value.
That's why you have the Benz and the BMW, we think of Germany, and Toyota and whatever, Toshiba and whatever we think of.
Country of origin,
country of origin, made in Sri Lanka. And that's the thing, we have made in Ceylon, like Ceylon tea is Ceylon, and then you have Sri Lanka. So we still have that, but it still works. It works really well. So that whole brand, and Sri Lankans need to be proud of our brand. And our Sri Lankan expats working overseas should be our brand ambassadors. Rather than saying all countries bankrupt or whatever. So there's a push and a pull in with this whole thing. There's a push to push out because of the country situation. So people are trying to go. There's a pull from that side. So we need to talk to those guys who succumb to that or who've gone there and say, what would make you come back? Is it international schools, or is it a different curriculum, or is it a whatever? What is it that make you come back? And I think policy should be on like zero tolerance on corruption, e-procurement for government. No unsolicited tenders for
Those
government.
are long shots.
Long
Right?
shot.
But you're asking me for the policies.
Yeah.
But Sean, I'm going to ask you a very unfair
Shannon, I just
question.
have one question just quickly before
Okay, cool.
we move on to something else.
But now Sean knows that I'm going to ask him an unfair question, so I'm going to pop it right now. Sean, now we speak about a lot of policies, and like I've been on this program for quite a number of years, and we just speak about a lot of things. Usually, the things that professionals and educated people come on the show and say, no, we should not do this. This will destroy our country. Usually, governments end up doing that, and hence the current situation of Sri Lanka. But right now, people want to do the right thing. They want to get this country out of this rut and do it as soon as possible. Now, you say that the government is working towards bringing proper policies of trying to, remedy the current situation in the short term, in the long term, and, far beyond that. 2048, you said. But usually in Sri Lanka, what happens is, whichever government, just like Himali said, you gather data for 3-4 years, and then before you can implement a policy or even produce a white paper, you're back home. A next government comes in. They do the same exercise, and then they go home. And then a new government comes in. So, Sean, like as an advisor to the Ministry of Labour and Foreign Employment, what kind of assurances do you have that these policies that you collect, you gather data for, spend millions and millions of Sri Lankans taxpayers' money and create would go forward or would be implemented under even a different government? What kind of an assurance can you give?
If you look at the last year, what we have done, we haven't produced any white papers, concept papers, no committees whatsoever. When we took over the ministry, foreign remittance was less than 200 million per month.
By which month are you talking about?
May last year.
May last year.
So last month it was 580 million US dollars. That was the remittance that was sent from migrant workers. We implemented an electric car permit for migrant workers. Everyone had their doubts, but we did it. And we recently got the approval from the cabinet to increase your duty-free allowance based on the amount of money that you remit. Now, when you go abroad, depending on the number of days you spend overseas, you have an allowance. It doesn't take your remittance into consideration.
But then, Sean, does that really qualify as policy?
No, now, see, at the end of the day, now policies are there to provide you with guidance to implement certain things. Now, as she correctly said, she says, no unsolicited proposals. So government has a procurement procedure. You have to go through it. But what if there's something very interesting for the betterment of the country? I know it's fair to have a cynicism because that is what this country has gathered at the end of the day after 70 plus years of independence. But we have to take a fresh look. We can't be pessimistic every day. We don't talk about just producing policies. We have to talk about activities that we can put into action. We talk about programs.
But Sean, now, I mean, people work on experiences. I mean, I'm not going to go and put my hand into a burning flame because I probably would have burnt my hand before, and I know that that's fire and it's going to burn my hand. So people work on that. So can you blame people for their cynicism or skepticism?
No, we can't. We can't. But politicians.
So to address that, might I suggest something? Increase transparency. Let people know. People aren't as unknowing or stupid, to simply say, not to understand certain provisions or even certain technical matters. We have enough professionals in Sri Lanka who would understand them, but why the lack of transparency?
So the interesting question. Now she was talking about e-procurement. Bangladesh has a case study. The e-procurement commission, they make profits. We have been trying to do this since 2015. This is 2023. Why wasn't it done? Was it as a result of lack of political will, or our own system that we have built prevents us doing certain progressive things? So it's as he mentioned, it's a lack
that
of
we built. What do you mean exactly? It's legal system or the?
See, it's partially contributed by people, partially contributed by politicians, partially contributed by government workers. You can't, say this party has done it. We also have contributed by voting politicians, by bringing them into power, knowingly or unknowingly.
Oh, definitely, Sean.
Knowingly or unknowingly, right? So we are in a, we can just play the blame game and
No,
say
no,
you
I'm
did it. No,
not
I'm just saying. No,
blaming.
I'm not saying you. I'm just saying, so this is a situation, where now, we talk about education. 90% of our jobs require vocational training. And we have about 200 students coming out without higher education. Right. If you look at any job advertisement, they only ask for O-levels and A-levels. They don't ask for vocational qualifications. So people don't take vocational training into consideration. And right now, education is being revamped. They have looked at every possible progressive education systems in the world. They are in the process of revamping the content of education. Now, our education is time-oriented. They say you have to spend 4 years in the university, whereas you can cover that content in 2.5 years.
Shan, when was the last time you met a graduate from a university in Sri Lanka who only spent 4 years in their university? I'm curious, Shan.
See, now that's the 40,000 government sector graduates you are talking about, but we have about 140 graduates who are going to private sector universities as well.
Oh, private sector universities, definitely. I mean, I'd be surprised if you find a graduate who has spent more than 4 years, probably because of his own faults of failing the exams.
Well, I myself...
But Shan, you missed the question. My question was, what sort of a guarantee do the people of Sri Lanka have that these policies will flow? Because now, from my perspective, I mean, from the perspective of a member of the general public, I mean, politics, we can have different political arguments saying, this government rescued us from bankruptcy and all of that. I understand. Our own political biases come into play. But the fact of the matter remains the same. The government right now is unelected. The president is unelected. The parliament has lost the mandate of the people. Sorry?
He's elected.
Selected.
Yes, unelected by the people. The president is unelected.
But
It's selected. Constitutional is selected. Again, political biases come into play. But what I'm saying is, it's easier for a person to say that the policies, it may be the best policy in the entire world, but that this government comes up with is not in the best interest of the people. It's easier for a person to say that it's a bad policy, despite of its merits, than saying it's a good policy. So against such a backdrop, usually if that's the case, when a new government comes in, they'll say, this is bad policy, they didn't have the backing of the people, unelected, no mandate, we're changing this, we're not going to follow this, it's wrong, it's bad. So, what is the government really doing to stop that?
Two things.
There's no remedy for that.
I'm sorry?
There's no remedy for that. I mean, for example, we have the Constitutional Council, we had it. And then the next government came and did away with that. Now we got it back. But it's harder to change it.
But then, Dr. Sujatha, when you say the next government got it back, the government that did away with it was the same government that got it back. More or less.
Same government. Yes, the same people. No, we had the Yahapalana government
that brought in the Constitutional Council.
Right.
Then in 2019, Gotabaya Rajapaksa's government came, took away the Constitutional Council. Then the same SLPP majority voted for the 21st Amendment.
That's fine. The thing is, you are saying, good policy, but they were not elected. It's not a PO process, so it's not. No, I think we should.
I'm just saying that it's easier for a person to make the case.
Whatever good policies, small steps, and small step at a time, and it doesn't have to be. I mean, you can't give guarantees. It's up to the people. They elect the governments.
So
but take the low-hanging fruits, do small steps, bring the Constitutional Council. Now we have sort of sectoral committees in Parliament. Small steps.
But Dr. Sujatha, so speaking on the buy-in of the people on these policies that we're passing right now, it's important to have consultation with the people. Now, simple things like even the tax bracket, the increase in the tax bracket. I understand that it was a requirement of the IMF, but some sort of discussion with the professionals would have made the situation at least a little bit better. Some sort of consultation, even on the ATA, the Anti-Terrorism Act. Yes, no discussion whatsoever before the.
Of course, there was a discussion. Now it's stalled.
Before it was put onto the on the Gazette.
They said, okay, we'll stall it. We'll have more discussion. Why are you saying there was no discussion?
There was no discussion when it was initially presented, and then there was massive public opposition.
The discussion was the process, and now it's stalled. It's taken back, and the same with the next one.
But Dr. Sujatha, are you saying that
how the process should be is the government first introduces a bill in the Gazette.
Yes.
And then kickstarts a discussion, and not first have public consultations
Normally
with
you
all
have a white
stakeholders
paper, no?
and then
The
present.
thing is, the last time Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe brought a white paper in 1980.
We haven't had a white paper, I think, in 2 decades.
Actually, there's a good reason for not having white papers.
Then you discuss
Yeah.
it.
Yes,
like
exactly.
you're suggesting.
No, no, not suggesting. I mean, I'm wondering if I'm
In this
confused.
country, white papers won't work.
Exactly.
You know, first, remember the white paper 1980 something Ranil Wickremesinghe brought. It was torn apart. Nobody read it. I asked somebody recently, he brought me a proudly displayed pamphlet they did, denouncing the white paper. I said, did you know what was in the white paper? It's exactly what we're talking about now, what we want. Nobody read it. It was trashed. So what Mr. Javadhan had said, Mr. Wickremesinghe, is just go ahead and do it anyway. I mean, that's a bit, you can't, but we have a process for 2 weeks for the, and then 2 weeks for the judicial consideration, and then in the parliament, there were discussions, and that's where it was stalled.
But Dr. Sujatha, judicial consideration, you challenged it on the constitutionality.
But look at the thing, ATA was taken back. They said we'll reconsider, and recently what's the other bill? Mr. Sajid Premdas asked about the IMF, no. Central Bank bill. He said, we'll have
Dr.
more
Sujatha,
discussion.
are we to be thankful for the government for not introducing repressive legislation?
No, I think Parliament is doing what it should. These things, we elect our representatives.
Into a different...
Consultation should not be in every town hall about these acts. Parliament is a place, and I think it's happening. The Parliament is getting the pressure. We have 2 examples, just 2 recent examples.
So making this very concrete on brain drain, if there is a shortage of doctors in the country today, and a UK qualified or Australian qualified doctor wants to work in Sri Lanka, will your ministry support that?
We are looking at inbound migration. Now see how the entire discussion transpired. I think
Daniel put us back on track. Thank you
very much for doing that.
You should join us the next time.
If we are willing to send our people abroad to work, we should be willing to accept other people as well. There's nothing to argue in that. So we are looking at inbound labor. We have to make it easier for people to come and work, especially if you are focusing on high-skilled people. Like, if you're promoting STEM education, we have, complex skills who are going to work in, high complex industries. For little jobs, we should bring people down from certain other countries. There's nothing to negotiate in it. And then we have stopped, doctors and nurses. Look at nurses. It's very difficult to get the membership of Nursing Association.
Because the SLMC is the gatekeeper.
That's right.
That is
but
the
that's the political will you need to have.
To answer now, again coming back, if you look at certain countries who have done this successfully, there are 3 things they have done. Number 1, engage your diaspora. That's number 1. Formal and informal search. Set up institutes. In fact, we sent a cabinet paper last year to set up what she called Overseas Sri Lankan as it is. Read the budget, it is there. And it was given to the foreign ministry to implement. I don't know what's happening there. Okay? So we looked at it. We put forward certain progressive policies. Number 2, in Sri Lanka, 90% of jobs are vocational training driven. Only 10% of jobs can be obtained through professional skills. So number 2, invest more in vocational training and encourage diaspora to come and set up businesses here so that they have sufficient, efficient labor force to run their startups. Number 2. Number 3, have a system where they can easily engage with their home country. That is again through diaspora, and ensure there are enough and more people for them to come and set up their businesses. Now we talk about South Korea. We missed the point. South Korea has 17 free trade agreements. Where did they get the knowledge from? It's not STEM education. They have universities teaching degrees in trade agreements. Right? China has only 18 free trade agreements. They did the knowledge transfer, technology transfer. Kia, the reputation they have today, they didn't have it 20 years ago. They are the 2nd fastest moving automobile brand in the USA. Samsung today, it was not Samsung, the same brand reputation 20 years ago.
Nokia used to dominate the market.
They improve it. Now, it's very easy for us to sit and debate because it's very sensational. But, it's at the end of the day, it's about execution, putting things into action. You need strong political will. And sometimes people don't like it, some people might like it. Now we are, she was talking about female labor force participation. We have made it difficult for women to work in this country. We are the 20th in the world in terms of gender gap. So what we have to do, we have to change the labor laws. Are we doing public consultation? We had the 3rd session today. We have 2 more sessions next week and week after. We talk to general public, we talk to unions. When we invited unions to submit their proposals, they said, if you have a draft, let us take a look and we'll discuss. I said, no drafts. We need your opinions, we need your ideas. It's a brainstorming session. They said no.
They said no.
You have a draft, send us the draft across, we'll take a look at it and we'll discuss. So that's the traditional way of doing things.
So Sean, don't you think you should be more outgoing about this? Inform the people that this is what we're trying to do.
See, we have done it. We have public consultations.
Okay.
As a member country of ILO, we have an obligation to engage with stakeholders. So we have done it. We are doing it. We have invited every possible parties. We have spoken to chambers.
This is to draft a new
Unified Labour Code. Unified Labour Code to make it easier for companies to operate.
Okay.
For investors to come and set up their businesses. For people to do part-time jobs. Flexible, young people to work.
And once you make it into an act, then the next government comes, it's harder to change the policy. But the thing is, we can't just have policies, we need to enact them into laws. So I think that's...
I think Shania had a question when I so rudely interrupted her. Sorry.
Dilip, I just had a question for you. Given our governments, often their complacency on matters like this, what is the worst case scenario if none of these policies and amendments have been implemented in the next 2 or 3 years?
No, I think in order to create the business environment, in order for us to doing business, it is very important that the private sector, it's important that the public sector actually create consistent policies. So without that, it's very difficult for the private sector or the investors to go and do something. And we have to comply by the law. And as an organization, like John Keel's Public Code Company, we'd go that. But we need to have consistent policies, which is enabling for us to do the business. And that's the only thing which the government needs to do. And if those plans and policies not robust and not conducive for business, then obviously what happens is that there is no output coming in. So it's important that for them to be very sensitive around it, get the input from the expertise that you have around, and create such policies which are not going to be that difficult to come in. So I'll give you one example. We were looking at, in Sri Lanka, we were getting about 1.4 million square feet of new shopping malls that coming into the country. And then when we looked at it, there's no single foreign brands for people to come and purchase, especially tourists. So when we looked at it, when we analyzed, let's say, brands like Louis Vuitton, Gucci's and all that come in, sort of 35% to 40% more expensive in Sri Lanka. The reason was the para-tariffs that were applicable. Then we did a white paper around it, do a research, how much Thailand is charging, how much India, etc., and gave it to the Ministry of Finance for them to study, and said, if you take this out, and if you make it more competitive, these brands can come in, so that we have basically what they did for watches. You can actually create this for tourists to look at it. So then they were considering it, and it is stopped in somewhere in between. So things like that, which creates more competition for us to actually get into the business, and that's what is required from policy's perspective.
Right. So moving on, Dilip, I was wondering, now we were speaking about public consultations. Let's speak about the tourism sector alone. Is that happening now? Has everything stalled like the program you mentioned before?
You mean the public-private sector partnership?
No, I mean consultations in developing policies. Now, I know even during Kimali's time, you did quite a lot to bring up tourism in the country. I think we hit an all-time high somewhere a few years around your time. So what's happening now? Are those policies still in place? Are they being developed, or has just everything been let go?
Actually, we created a tender, a really thorough tender. Dilip knows this. We made a thorough tender for a travel app, which should, after doing studies on all the other apps in the world, the bigger ones, and it's a super one, but that has been abandoned, which I was sad to see for the country. So they are, I think, coming up with a new app, and that was this unsolicited cabinet paper which I was sent, which is quite shocking, and I hope that the president doesn't I'm sure he will not, because seeing it. But so there are certain things that have been stopped. Yeah, I really don't know what the thought process of that is, because it doesn't matter who the chairperson is, or it was me or somebody else. I mean, I look at it differently, because some of us, we work not for salaries, we worked free of charge. So, you know, whichever government, and that's something that I feel that you don't even need a minister for tourism, really. It's almost like something that the president should have. And then to restructure, I was suggesting, because there were 4 institutions, I was suggesting to merge them. There was no reason to have 3 complete institutions doing the same thing. Just put 3 chairpersons, and then there's a school as well, but leave the school aside, these 3. So I was chairperson of all 4. But I suggested that we don't have 4 chairpersons, because everyone else has 4. I just happened to be the only first woman and the only one person doing all 4. But now it's like jobs for the boys, kind of a thing. So you sort of, you sort of give this chairperson post to these people. And I was saying it's not right. We don't need. No, we talk of Maldives, we talk of Thailand. They have only 1 body. They don't have 3 bodies doing the same thing. And 400 staff. Okay? Maldives, I think, has, did it how many? 25? 16, 25, 35? I don't know how many Maldives has. At one point, it's quite low.
Yeah.
It's very low. You see, by definition, what I was explaining at that time to the hierarchy was, when you want to promote your country, you need global expertise, because you're competing with the best of the best, right? This is not like a mom and pop shop at home. You're competing with Indonesia, you're competing with Australia.
And just because you're new to the game, or relatively not as good as they are, that doesn't mean they're going to cut you some slack.
No, not at all. It's a ruthless game. It's a huge competition, okay? So you're never going to be able to recruit that level of competence into a government institution to do promotions, because salaries are very low. Okay, so what I was saying is, you don't need all this kind of a hell of a lot of people. And if you look at the recruitment in government, this is another thing. All recruitment has to go through MSD. MSD is in Treasury. Treasury decides that you should have a director of marketing, and Treasury decides. I'm like looking at them saying, how do you know, sitting in Treasury, how tourism should run? Right? They decide how many clerks and how many peons and how many whatever and whatever. When I turned up, there were 400 staff. It's like, whoa. And then during COVID, I was looking at the list of people, because we had to do a roster because we had lockdown time. And then depending on the minister, you'll see Gampa. Kego. So you see, without knowing when they joined, I could tell you which period they would have joined. Literally looking at where they come from. So politicians have just put people. But and I don't blame the staff. They haven't been trained. They may have not even been interested in tourism. I don't know. But they got a job, right? So these are the policy things. I'm glad you asked that question. I could, chat about it after the show. This is something I'm really passionate about. These are the things we got to change, right? And I suggested to merge them. So you asked the question, what has happened? Nothing. So that's unfortunate. And I've done the paper on working with private-public partnership with the hotel, because we don't have capacity to run a really, premium sort of hotel school. So I worked with a Swiss hotel school in Switzerland. So they came over and they did a program also, right? So I was looking to sort of work in with them, maybe giving some land, and then sort of...
we actually, Sri Lanka Foreign Employment Bureau is working with them at the moment.
The same school?
Same school, we are going to support them.
Yeah. So they told you about...
Yeah, so they came and met with us.
Them. Yeah, I just contacted them one day and said, hey, do you want to work with me?
No,
Sri Lanka government, I'm tourism. I contacted Thailand. It's a question of reaching out to the world and saying, hey, we are open and we are willing to work. It's as simple as that. No need of big things. Just pick up the phone and call, and you call 20 people and one says, okay, that's all you want, no?
Yeah, I mean, our biggest challenge is not debt restructuring, but restructuring government. I mean, we have 1,000 institutions, and, we had departments, and to make them more easier to work with, we created corporations and then state-owned enterprises. the department still exists, state corporations still exist for the same thing, and they have state enterprises, and they're all competing. So restructuring government is going to be the biggest challenge. Or IMF, they might say,
maybe the appropriate word would be governance rather than government.
Answering your question with the tourism, I think the good thing is the UNWTO today announced that the tourism is actually in the path of fully recovery before COVID, to the pre-COVID area. So Middle East is actually, if you look at that area, plus 15%.
So you mean in Sri Lanka?
No, overall Middle East globally. In terms of the globally.
He's talking globally.
Plus 15.
Right.
And then if you look at in terms of the other Asian area, it's about minus 20%. So we are in the path of recovery. Where Sri Lanka is concerned, on the first 3 months we've seen is much better than the last year. And then actually getting closer to the numbers that we experienced in 2018. That was the best year, and then most probably I think those numbers will reach there in 2024 from a perspective. So there's a certain amount of work which the private sector is doing, and then the public sector is doing it to the best of their ability. Certain lot of activities are coming in certain markets. So this actually will contribute, plus the stability in the country itself actually will help for people to come into the country and then move on. So talking about the consistency of I think that the app project actually they have resumed, and to some extent, and that's been
because of the cabinet paper. I think perhaps somebody.
Yeah, I think there's another sort of a loan agency is doing another app. I think they're continuing with that. I think.
So I mean, to link to the tourism sector is doing better. You think you
much better.
Do better. This is despite, to get to our topic, despite the skills people do.
Okay, doing better, I have to correct.
But we could do much
correct
better
there, because January, February, March last year we had 100,000 each month. This year too we've got 100,000 each. So it's kind of identical. But May, obviously it's better because last year May was a crazy May.
Last year's May.
Last year's May was horrendous. So actually last year, January, February, March also was like 96,000,
But there were plans to promote the Aragale as well, weren't there?
That's just not from tourism, but...
So I think Shan is in the best position to answer this question. Now Shan, I know this is a lot, restructuring governance, but on that front, what really is taking place? Give us a little bit of an insider's view.
So we have about 1.7 million government workers, and their productivity is something that we can discuss later. But right-sourcing the government sector is absolutely necessary, without a question. But it's a very sensitive area to touch. At the end of the day, it's about their jobs, whether they got it willingly or otherwise.
Exactly.
But what government has done, they have taken a policy decision. You can take and leave up to 5 years. You can work in the private sector, or you can go elsewhere. Without salaries, but your promotions, increments, and whatnot will be in order when you are back in the country. In that way, we can bring down our payroll. So that is something
in the short term.
In the short term, and then of course we'll have to relook at the scope of every ministry. Now, we did a study, not very well structured. We just looked at entrepreneurship training done in the country, done by 40 plus different institutes, spent 50 billion last year. If you invested this money in 50 entrepreneurs, 1 billion each, you'd have developed 50 fantastic entrepreneurs in this country. So the duplication of efforts, the definition...
So 50 billion was spent on what exactly?
Entrepreneurship training.
Entrepreneurship training?
Training.
50 billion?
50 billion.
With a B?
B. You heard me right. 50 billion.
Without producing any
entrepreneur. So, you'll have to look at the entire government sector from a completely different perspective. The problem, government does not have the same agility like a private sector organization. There are rules and regulations.
Plus it's bigger.
It's bigger. And also there are certain sensitive areas we can't touch, like culture. Now, when we came to the office, women, if you have a child under 5 years of age, you can't go abroad. What about the father? Why are you discriminating women? I mean, if you have a child, that's your responsibility as mother and father.
So the father can go abroad.
But father can go abroad. When women go, they keep you there, and then you ask questions whether you have a child or not. You have to have what we call family background report. What happens? People pay, under the table they go. Corruption. So, policymakers, culture is something that is personal. You have to keep it to yourself. Policymakers should completely do away with that and then look at things rationally. Make it easier everyone to work. everyone to survive. If you want to go, you can go. You want to come back, make it easy for them to come back. There are no people to work, you bring other people to work. That's how other countries survive. You know, we can't protect one side and you can't be progressive on the other side. So, you know, it's a contradictory decision that
you can't be progressive and regressive at the same time.
At the same time, you can't. So, you know, these changes, you know, we have a classic example. I'm sorry to quote this example in a public forum. Organic fertilizer, bad change management example. You know, that has produced enough and more learning for policymakers to learn from that mistake. When you are making changes in the public sector, be mindful. You can't be short-sighted. You can't be short-sighted. You know, we keep saying today's problem we have is as a result of decisions we have made in the past because they were not properly thought through. So, you know, it's this lack of systems thinking. Policymakers, you know, policymakers, when they do something, that is not the popular thing. Probably, you know, they are not going to be very popular. People are not going to like it. But if they're producing results, as an example, in South Korea, when a woman is pregnant, you get a card, you know, ATM card of some sort. You can draw cash, medicine, food, and whatnot. It's a fantastic thing to do. What are they doing? They're ensuring their future labor force is in order. So it's not cultural, it's rational. So, you know, we tend to carry this whole idea of our culture, you know, whatever it is. I think we need to leave that aside. And, you know, as politicians and policymakers, you have to look at things rationally, make certain decisions, even if they're not popular, for the betterment of the country.
But then again, their unpopularity must also be based. I mean, if they're rationally incorrect, and if you can't, you know, justify them rationally, and they are unpopular, that doesn't mean they're good policy, does it?
I agree. But, you know, then we have to again debate which.
So you have to have a rational discussion.
That's right.
Rational discussion. You know, do away with the just protests and slogans and hashtags and all of that. Sit down and have a rational discussion and reason it out.
We talk about all these countries: Singapore, South Korea, Thailand, Malaysia. We talk about them. You know, we draw examples from them. How did they develop?
Singapore did away with corruption.
Exactly. So you have to do certain things.
Authoritarianism.
Well, we don't want to go. We don't want to go there.
That's the time for that.
We tried that also.
I think we failed.
Did not work.
Didn't work.
Didn't work. So.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we've had quite the discussion. We're in the final few minutes of the program. So for closing statements this time around, we can allocate 5 minutes because there's much that we discussed. We were initially planning on discussing only brain drain, but then throughout the discussion or within therein, we understood that there are many other connected aspects, and we went in depth into those aspects as well. So starting off for the closing statements, I'd like to start off with Dilip Mudadinia, the Senior Vice President of John Keel's Leisure, for your closing statement.
Yeah, I think the brain drain and the country's image has a direct relationship. You will basically, which call the pride of nation. If the pride of nation is there for people, then people like to move. The stickiness of that particular country is high. And that cannot be, that's a long-term solution that cannot be achieved very quickly, because the image of a country is basically determined on what people do, or what country does, and what they do, and what they say. It's important that the country has that consistency right throughout, and then cohesive approach in improving the image of the country, which includes tourism, sports, exports, people of the country, and the foreign policy or the public diplomacy. These 5 factors will actually create the image of the country, what we do. So we have to have a cohesive approach in reaching that, and it's not an easy exercise. That will take a little longer to achieve. And it's very important that we build that brand or the country's image so that the people will actually create that sense of place or the pride in nation that comes along, and they like to stick around, and then also they will have benefit coming in. In a short-term solutions, while we go there, it will take 10 to 15 years for an image to be properly built for a country, even more than that. So in between, we actually create again a conducive policies and environment for the businesses to grow. When the businesses grow actually in that country, that have a lot of opportunities for people in that country, and then that will also give them a certain ability for them to work. and also creation of entrepreneurs, creation of people who can create things, which I said directly has a relationship with the STEM and the other areas that we're looking at it, and creating actually legal framework that is required. The third one is actually required legal framework in order to get the people from outside, and also ensure that actually inside people will remain. And I can also give an example like digital nomads. So during the time we were having a difficulty in finding people who are savvy in social media. But when we went down south, we saw the large number of people who are coming and working in those places. We found people who have worked for Facebook, Twitter, and we found people in LinkedIn and work there who understand the business. So we gave them certain amount of work, and it was fantastic what they came up with. So these are foreigners who are here, but they had difficulties in opening their bank accounts, simple things. They had difficulties in long-term visa. So the digital nomad is an extremely good way that we can actually bring some of the talents back which we lost and making use of them. So there are solutions of that nature that we can work on, and work on the short-term solutions of that nature in order to fill the gap by people who have actually gone overseas, or if you don't have enough qualified people.
Thank you very much, Dilip. We're moving on to Shan Yahampath, Advisor, Ministry of Labour and Foreign Employment, for your closing statement.
Thank you very much. Again, quickly summarize, we need to engage our diaspora, through a formal or informal mechanism. Number two, we need to invest a lot of time and energy in vocational training, ensure our, youth has proper skills to work. And also, if you are to encourage investors as well as diaspora to come and invest, set up businesses, we have to put up infrastructure like export processing zones and science parks and so on and so forth. That's one side. And also, we as a country, we need to understand our comparative advantages. We can't be good at everything. As Dr. correctly mentioned, we have to somehow connect with few regional supply chains. That also has a vulnerability. Even vulnerabilities are there in both formal and informal sectors. And as a government should encourage setting up businesses, running businesses, and make it easier for organizations to offer jobs. Hiring and firing both easier, and some people are not going to like it. So in that sense, government can play a role in terms of the social security. No government can protect jobs. No one can give you that guarantee. But government has an obligation to protect its citizens, people. That can be done through a proper social security net. What we are doing at the moment, we are setting up an unemployment insurance scheme that will be implemented within 6 to 9 months. Once you lose your job, voluntarily or otherwise, you will be compensated till you find a job. And if you're unemployed, that will go into a database of this national labor market information system that I was talking about. They'll be referred to different institutes for reskilling. And also looking at the speed at which certain technologies are changing, starting from artificial intelligence to quantum computing, 35% of regular jobs run the risk of being automated. Certain skills are going to be redundant. So essentially, we have to have a process to reskill our people. We have to bring in new technologies at the cost of certain people losing jobs. So we have to have a process to recognize that and have a process to get these people to be reskilled. And then also, we need to bring in new technologies. Yes, we can encourage people in STEM education. Once they get educated, they'll go elsewhere because there are no proper industries for them to work. How do we get technologies? We have to have few but good free trade agreements without a question. There's nothing to argue in that. So that could be done, with certain benefits. When you get something, you have to give something in. You can't have it and you can't eat it at the same time.
There's no free lunch.
There's no free lunch. And yes, we have to promote inbound migration. We have to promote virtual migration. We have to make it easier for women to work. We have to make it easier for young people to work if they're willing to work. If you want to do more overtime, you have to make it possible for them to do overtime. If you want to do 2 jobs, part-time jobs, flexible jobs, we have to make it easier for them to work. Governments can't be a nanny. They can't control people. If you want to go, you can go. If you want to come back, we have to make it easier for them to come back. So we have to do away with that traditional parenting role. Government can't be a parent.
But if the government invests millions and millions in your education,
right,
the government has a duty to ensure that
it has.
The money is, or some form of a...
Education itself is partially social security. That is to ensure that your human resources are educated and competent to work so that they can make a better living. But if you want to go, you can go. We have to make it easier for them to go. But as you said, yes, have a system in place to recover whatever money that was invested in you. That's what Singapore does. So they have what they call kind of public ledger, where the investments done in individuals are recorded. So you have to work for certain years to compensate. If you want to leave, you have to pay and go. If you want to repatriate, now all these people who are migrating to settle down in other countries, how do they take their money? Illegally. If you are disclosing what you are repatriating, you have to pay about 20%. It's not happening. Say they would easily pay 20 to 30 lakhs for a migrant consultants to get residence visa. If government is going to ask for another 20 lakhs, 2 million for the education, they would easily pay. And most of these people who are going to settle down, they have fairly okay living in this country. But we can't stop them going. They go due to various reasons. So as a government, we have to open up. We have to open up. We have to work with other countries. We can't restrict ourselves. As a single nation, that is not going to work with any other country in the world. And we have to understand the strategic importance of our location in terms of tourism. You go to any hotel in the Gulf region, there are 60, 70, 80 people working. They literally run these places. Use those people. They bring in what we call, international competitiveness into our country. Bring them down, help them to set up businesses. They bring new connections, they bring new investors. Those are the opportunities we have to capitalize on, rather than trying to stop people leaving. And then, government has to again make a policy decision, whether we are going to be a service-oriented economy, whether we are going to be an exported-oriented economy. I think that decision is being made at the moment. So once it is decided, we have to have a mechanism to ensure that it is properly implemented. Now, in our country, as far as my experience is concerned, 90% is planning, 10% is execution. It should be the other way around. Less planning, more working. We have enough and more reports. We don't need. But sometimes we need to do agile decision making in real time. That's the volatility of the world that we operate in. That's the kind of ambiguity that we have. So even as a government, we have to bring in that private sector agility to certain extent. Otherwise, you can't make decisions. So how do we ensure this? All what we have to have is political will, determination that this progressive change should take place. Some people may like it, some people may not like it. But is that an assurance? No, it is not. At the end of the day, it is something that I can't promise. Anything could happen, given the political nature of certain things. Surprises can take place. We don't know. If people are doing dirty things at the cost of development of the country, at the end of the day, everyone is going to suffer. So we as a nation, we have to leave our political ideologies aside. We have to look at the country. Now, we were talking about pride of our nation. Look at Japan. After the Second World War, when Japan was given money, because they didn't have money to eat, Japanese people told the government, we don't want to eat. You can invest that money in infrastructure. When South Korea was suffering, when they had the same financial crisis, they sent their women to Gulf countries to work. They went and worked, just like Sri Lankan women did. They didn't complain, but they came back. They brought expertise, exposure. They set up small businesses. Now today we send people to South Korea to work to do little jobs. Still, they make more money than being here. So it's a process. Change won't happen overnight. We have this kind of unrealistic expectation that when government comes into power, change should be immediate. Turning a tuk-tuk is easier, but turning a vessel is difficult. It takes a lot of time and energy efforts. So we need to understand the speed at which government works, but if people are willing to work harder to take more progressive decisions, government servants, they have a rule book. They have to go by that. They have to interpret that. They can't do anything innovative. politicians, policymakers are the ones who can do that by being more innovative, by being more progressive. So all what we can do is to wish our politicians, since it's not a political discussion, and we don't represent any of them, wish them that luck to have that political will, regardless of the opposition that they might encounter. What has to be done has to be done. Another 10 years down the line, 25 years down the line, this nation will not survive
another financial crisis.
Another financial crisis unless we make certain fundamental changes at the cost of short-term uncomfort. Even if you are not comfortable, there's nothing we can do about it. So that's all about my conclusion.
Thank you very much, Shani Hampath, Advisor to the Ministry of Labour and Foreign Employment. We now turn our attention to Daniel Alphonsus, former Advisor, Ministry of Finance.
The brain drain that keeps me up at night is the brain drain of a permanent nature, where people uproot themselves from their homes, their families, their communities, and form a new life and a new future in another land. The reasons for this have been structural in nature, they've been political, they've been economic, and they've persisted over decades. The challenge for us today is to make it easier for people to stay and make it also easier for that talent to be replaced. How do we do this? We make it easier for people to stay by ending racism, by also making it easier to have a future for people's children in terms of education, in terms of healthcare, in terms of the cost of living. And critical for that is the economic reforms that need to be undertaken, including labor market reforms, including tariff reform. On the question of replacing talent, how do we ensure that our industries, the IT industry, the tourism industry, growing industries, are able to acquire the talent that they need? In my view, we need to make it possible for anyone who is skilled to come to Sri Lanka and work. And practically speaking, there are two ways of doing this. That anyone from a developed country, that is a country that is 4 or 5 times richer than Sri Lanka, should be able to get off a plane and get a visa to live and work here for 3 or 4 years. Secondly, anyone who is qualified to build a bridge, to heal a human body, to draw a plan in Australia, in Canada, in the UK, in Singapore, should be able to do that here as well without any additional paperwork.
Thank you very much, Daniel Alphonsus, former advisor to the Ministry of Finance. We now turn our attention to Kimali Fernando, former chairperson of the SLTDA.
Thank you, and I've learned a lot from the panelists here today, and I thank you for this opportunity. Yes, brain drain has affected us tremendously in the last year, I would say, or so. And I think there are immediate actions that have to be taken, and when I say immediate, within a month or two, and the next maybe in 6 to 12 months. So the immediate action, I think, is that you need to bring in, looking at the particular sectors, look at healthcare, what are we going to do? Are we going to allow the Sri Lankans to come in? That kind of immediate problem. IT, what are we going to allow foreign nationals to come into Sri Lanka for a given period of time without bringing the price of salaries down? Tourism, if there are not enough chefs, we advertise, and if you don't, you should be able to get chefs or whoever, temporarily at least for the next 5 years. So immediately, while the place is sort of, if you like, sinking a little, right, you get the resources to keep this afloat. Right?
But Kimali, there were in previous instances, they tried to bring in IT graduates into the country, they tried to bring in foreign professionals in different sectors to the country, faced massive opposition. Do you think things will be different this time around?
I think that if you start with Sri Lankans coming back, which is the doctors, that would be easier because they're Sri Lankan citizens. So I think that would be a start from a political perspective. So because they're Sri Lankans coming back, right?
Do you think that'll actually be better?
I think that would be, I think that would
more
be better because that would be more accommodating than foreigners coming.
And it just requires courage. If you look at the Apollo Hospitals transaction, it involved Indian doctors coming and working here. And so many Sri Lankan lives have been saved by Indian surgeons operating on Sri Lankans. The best bypass surgeons in this country are Indians.
So I think that if you go through the different ones, the tourism, agriculture, I think a lot of focus must be immediately given on agriculture, precision agriculture, and focusing, I mean, just giving them what should you grow, when should you grow, whether everyone is growing a pumpkin and the next, this kind of thing, simple stuff. And reprofile, I think, agriculture. I think that's something that I would look at. Women participation, when we say women, should participate, but you need to understand why women do not participate. You see, they're meant to look after elderly care is not there in Sri Lanka. So they're looking after their elderly parents or in-laws. They have to look after their children because they can't keep the child at home because there's no care for them. The transport is poor because there are no school buses as such. There are vans and so on. But if you have like in Singapore, you have yellow buses, that school buses, where you put your kid into a school bus.
No, but we do have a few, right? Society bus.
But yeah, but it's not like all over the place.
It's not enough.
It's not enough, and it's you have to make sure that it's strict and that there are no violations, abuse, whatever. But also the government needs to, there's a complete trust deficit. The real reason why people are going, we don't believe there's a future. We don't believe there's a future. We have lost all hope. And to bring that back, there's no one silver bullet that will solve this for you, unfortunately. It is a multi-pronged thing. So the transparency, the corruption, the law and order, the accountability, the whole gamut of stuff comes with it. And if we don't address it, you will have people moving out, and you could say, perhaps be an ostrich, putting your head in the sand and say it doesn't matter. But I strongly believe it matters. It matters because out of this current crisis, the only way out is you have to grow yourself out of this, not taking more loans and loans and loans. The economy has to grow yourself out of this problem. And to grow yourself out, don't expect foreign investors to come now. You can't expect foreign investors when the local people are moving out.
And
when the local investors are you going to go to a country and invest when the locals are flooding out of the country in boats and planes? No, you're not, right? Let's not fool ourselves. We have to, citizens have to grow ourselves out of this problem, and I think we shouldn't only blame the government. We should not only blame the government. They have a huge role to play. Yes, we blame all politicians, but I think we all have an aversion to all politicians, irrespective of party or politics. So that's a view, and that's something that we want. We are looking for a leadership to come in, credibility. It doesn't matter which party or not a party or whatever, but what I personally look for is a team, not one person, but a team of people who have credibility, whom I could trust in, who is competent and who love our country, truly love our country, who would step forward and say, this is why I'm doing this, and we would trust that person. And that's the day I think we would not stop brain drain, but we would get out of this real crisis that really we are in at the moment.
Thank you very much, Kimali Fernando, former chairperson of the SLTDA. Finally, we've got Dr. Sujatha Gamage, Senior Research Fellow at LearnAsia.
Thank you. I think we are going through the worst economic crisis that we have ever faced. And I think the next 5 years, there's going to be, people are going to leave, and I think we have negative growth now. But I think we have to get it to positive growth. And I think those things I don't worry about. I think let Kimali and Julie, it's their job. How do we survive these 5 bad years? As policy analysts, I think 3 of us would be policy analysts. We look at structural changes that we need to do so that then after 5 years, this is a time for change because there's no money. For example, you take the advanced level examination, we have 60 subjects. How do we get to there? 2 papers each in 3 languages. It's become a massive industry. We can bring it down because we don't have money anymore to print a paper. So we have to bring it down to 10 subjects, which we think is the number subject. So this is, in a way, this is an opportunity for these kind of structural changes while the industries are struggling and keeping us above the water. So I think
Doctor, are you saying to bring down the number of subjects offered at the advanced level?
Yes, yes.
Is
I
it
mean, that's
already
another, but I'm just, let's not go in there, the details. But what I'm saying is, no, we have 60 subjects. If you take the Gao Kao in the Chinese exam, there are only 12 subjects. And the students select 3 or 4. So, I mean, we have 60 subjects. I don't know how we got there. So it's become a massive industry. The tuition industry, the textbook industry, everything's built around that. We can't afford that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what I'm saying is, these 5 years is, you know, while the industry is struggling with the people leaving and everything, it's for us to build the baseline, the structures, you know, not people. We can't think about changing people. It's more important to change the structures. So I don't care who's in there. I want anybody who helps us to structures, we'll work with them. And I think that when it comes to brain drain, I think today's topic, it really, all of us sort of came to this thing, it's more about labor mobility. It's not brain. I think we really should change the word. I mean, we've been using that, you said, since the 50s. You know, let's stop that word brain drain, because there's brain gain, and there is, when people leave, other people get to rise. So it's not as negative as that. So let's call it labor mobility. And what do we need for labor mobility? And I'm really, today, it was really, I feel optimistic knowing that people like, you know, Shan is in the ministry, you know, because I can see there are ideas, and you asked whether, you know, another government comes, these things, then they change the policies. But you have to get the policies and make them into laws. They're harder to change. So I think I really hope you get some legislation enacted so that we have something in place, you know, something solid in place. So I think it's an opportunity to make the small changes. And I think I look at the people leaving, as I said, you know, more women can come into the labor force. We can have some of the junior people can move up. Some of the people who stay here, they have more opportunities as the economy grows. So I'll take a positive spin on that, and I think this is a time for structural changes, big changes. So there's a lot of labor mobility, and some of the things about labor mobility, I think Daniel said about a cabinet paper. I'm not sure about that. Take the University Grants Commission. In our university system, you can't have anybody from outside coming in. It's very hard to get a teaching position in our universities. There was somebody during my time, the Jane Russell. She was a foreign student studying Peradine at that time. She wrote a brilliant book. It's about the Donamo Constitution and the committee system in there. Brilliant book. She never could get a faculty appointment in the political science department. She's still here in Sri Lanka, but you know, just doing some odd teaching here and there. She's a brilliant person who should have been in the political science department. So we really need to open the market, but for that, I think we need, for example, University Grants Commission. Right now, it's run by only academics. We need to open that. It should be, actually, if you take the British Medical Council, 50%, more than 50% of the members are non-medical persons. It is a law that they should be non-medical because they are looking out the interest of the people who are being users of the medical system. Our medical council is 100% made of doctors. So you think we can change the entry? They're the gatekeepers. So those are the structural changes we need to do. Let's not talk about brain drain. Let's talk about more labor mobility. And we need to work on reforms for that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sujatha Gamage, Senior Research Fellow at Learn Asia. Of course, a very thought-provoking discussion here on Face the Nation today. Didn't expect this much perspective on brain drain. However, now, as Dr. Sujatha pointed out, it's not brain drain, but labor mobility. A better word to address the situation in Sri Lanka. As Dr. Sujatha herself said, that's more hopeful for the country, of course, than looking at just the dark side of the things that are going on. Once again, thank you very much, Dr. Sujatha Gamage. Thank you very much, Kimali Fernando. Thank you very much, Daniel Alphonsus. Thank you very much, Shan Yahampat. Once again, good to have people like you advising the Ministry of Labour and Foreign Employment. Of course, there's much expected of these discussions. They would only bear fruit if we see some form of implementation that will eventually help Sri Lanka come out of this rut. Also, thank you very much, Dilip Mudadenia, for joining us on the program and sharing your expert opinion on the subject of Not brain drain, but labour mobility. Thank you very much to our journalists, Shania Dedigama and Shihar Anees, for asking all the right questions on behalf of the general public. Thank you very much to all our viewers out there for tuning in to another episode of Face the Nation. Until we meet again, take care. God bless.